been a foreign editor with the Hindustan Times for 2 decades. You have also served on India's National Security Advisory Board, and you've been involved with India's track to diplomatic engagement with the US, Japan, China, UK, EU, Israel, and South Korea. We are keen to hear your observations on the world's return to economic nationalism, Trump's tariffs, and the breakdown of the rule-based multilateral system of trade. Thank you for joining us, and a very warm welcome to you. Some of my opening comments before you start, ladies and gentlemen. There is a sense of deja vu around in the world now. After a less than satisfactory experiment with multilateral global trade and security, nations are racing back to the primitive simplicity of exclusive national identity and interests that were fashionable 100 years ago. Economic nationalism is back with full paraphernalia of muscular industrial policies, mercantilism, technology and material denials, opportunistic trade deals, and low fidelity dances with different trade and security partners. Trump's coercive economic and foreign policies are just one more shock to the multilateral system. Predictably, coercion has obtained concessions for the powerful, but there is a readily available playbook to counter tariffs and trade dictats. The world is familiar with the use of revenge tariffs, national subsidies, and the layered rerouting of international trade to bypass unilateral trade barriers, something they were just talking about a few minutes ago. Tariffs eventually end up raising the cost of trade for both the importer and the exporter, which is the reason why multilateral systems were set up in the first place. The increased local production and income from trade barriers tend to be short-lived in a fluid world, and the coercive strategies can best be seen as tactics. The particularly high tariffs on India's exports to the US would be an inconvenience, not a blow. India's domestic economy has reached a critical mass, and it can keep rolling on its own for some distance. However, Trump's derisive approach to India, despite India's leadership fondness of him, requires India to review and rework its relationship with other mega economies, especially in this neighborhood where it can be more competitive despite competition with its neighbors. Trump's tariffs could be a blessing in disguise for India also, and we have seen how India's government and industry responds to this provocation. With these words, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Chaudhuri to tell us what are India's options in the ongoing storm and where will the world settle once we've factored in these reciprocal economic nationalism. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll begin by pointing out try to explain a little about where I see the macro story, if you wish. As Vineet correctly pointed out, there was an international multilateral structure largely built around the United States, created after World War II. We all know that. And what we're seeing effectively is the result of two different forces taking place. One is the rise of China, and a sense that China is, if in many ways, exploiting or free riding on that international system, while not necessarily contributing that much in terms of global public goods. But it's also as a consequence of a number of macro factors in the economy of America. There's a breakdown in the consensus within the United States, which supported America's external policies since World War II. And the rise of both the MAGA movement, which is effectively a lower middle class revolt from middle America against the costs of America's engagements overseas, not just in terms of trade, which is being blamed for hollowing out America's manufacturing sector, but also in terms of the cost in terms of blood and treasure to maintain America's external alliances and relationships on the security side. It is now being matched by the rise of a left-wing populist movement, the Mamdani election, the Democratic primary, the challenge to Nancy Pelosi in her seat in California by Shaika Chakraborty. You're going to see a similar movement coming out of the left, which in many ways is a very similar isolationist stance as the MAGA movement does, that America expends too much effort trying to help the rest of the world, and it needs to look more inwards. So that is essentially breaking down America's support for the present multilateral structure. We're seeing a similar breakout taking place in Europe, where we'll see both right-wing populist movements coming up, but also the fact that America is now less and less willing to support the defense of Europe, at least out of its own pocket, requires Europe to will be requiring Europe to transfer 100 to 150 billion euros over the next 5 years into its own defense, which will almost certainly mean that Europe will begin to withdraw from the international system as well. Its ability to, if you wish, fund overseas development, multilateral organizations will begin to shrink dramatically over the next 5 years. So these are really vacuums. And the thing is interesting that China, the rising power, has its own domestic economic problems right now. Its own labor unemployment among its youth is somewhere in the region of 20 to 25%. The government is holding back a lot of social unrest in its own country. My company sends a regular team to China. They're all Mandarin speakers, and they travel around and come back, and they said he's holding on to potential protests in his country as he carries out a massive internal social transformation of his economy. But the result is that China doesn't step into the gap that America is leaving, except for a few isolated places where it sees its direct interests. They are not getting involved in trying to support sea lanes of communication. They are not supporting multilateral organizations. They're not even really backing the WTO, which is on its last legs now. China continues to do what it wants, but the view basically is that all the two major powers, superpowers definitely, nobody has the capacity, if you wish, to fill the role America had. If America doesn't do it, not my problem. We'll work out something in return. This leads us now to Trump. Now, the Trump administration is unusual because it's highly personalized. Trump is not a normal politician. He's effectively a real estate developer who became a reality TV star, and he functions in his own strange way. His mindset is really drawn from his experiences in the late 1970s and 1980s. He's a child of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Iran hostage crisis, the Jimmy Carter presidency, and that has really molded his mindset, and he continues to think in those terms. He hasn't added on in much baggage. He doesn't like to read anything, and he has his set of friends that he likes to work with, and he basically replicates that thinking. His economics is straightforward mercantilism. He genuinely believes that America made a mistake by getting involved in World War I and World War II, that America should return to just North America. As he often says, if we have two oceans on either side. If we just had North America, we wouldn't have to deal with the rest of the world. That's basically his mindset, which is why he strangely, therefore, wants Canada and Greenland to be part of America, because then he feels that that would secure America's interests. But that's Trump. But Trump as while he represents, he is the force of the political MAGA right now. His views are not necessarily the same as the rest of the MAGA movement. If you look at J.D. Vance, his vice president, if you read his speech in Jaipur when he came here, it's a remarkable contrast to even his own speech in the Munich Security Conference, where he denounced Europe. But he actually says in Jaipur, we need partners, but we need a different kind of partnership, one that is not parasitical of the United States. And Europe is a parasitical set of countries. India is not. And he actually argues that America must partner with India in the future, because India does not ask for America to send soldiers to die for it. It does not ask for American taxpayers to fund their wars. This is the kind of partnership we need. So you also have this Vance representing another school of the MAGA, if you wish, that has at least a limited concept of international partnerships of a certain variety. But he's also very clear that China is the common strategic thread between India and the United States, that China is the fundamental problem of the international system. So there's Trump, there's the MAGA movement outside of Trump, if you wish. Then there is his own family. And his family when I was in Washington recently, everybody said it's just a straightforward kleptocracy. They just want money. They are only interested in how much money can we get before granddad or father leaves office. They have an internal target, it seems, of $100 billion. But basically, whether you can put dump money in their crypto schemes, which is their favorite way to do it, become a Mar-a-Lago membership, $1 million, dinner with the president, $5 million, then you can at least get access. They will guarantee access to the president. They may not change policy because they don't control policy, but they will ensure that you can meet the president. The country that has played this game very well is Pakistan, which has probably already given about somewhere in the region of $40 to $50 million to the family. And is trying very hard to leverage that into something bigger. But other governments have been playing that game as well. And then you have the rest of his administration, the State Department, the Pentagon, the intelligence structure, which function more or less the same as they always have. They are very close, if you wish, to the advanced kind of MAGA that America has to change the relationship it had in the past. It has to demand that global public goods will be monetized because America has to rework itself in preparation for an overall conflict with China, or for an economic one. At the heart of this is technology. It's not necessarily military, though obviously these are connected. And within that, across the board, they are very clear that India is the partner, one of the key partners that they want to work with. So if you go to this, so we have a bizarre contrast right now where Trump is abusing India, but when Hegseth meets Rajnath Singh, when Rubio meets Jaishankar, when our intelligence people meet together, everything is hunky-dory. Everything works perfectly with that. So this is the weird contrast we have now in this disjointed American administration. In Washington, they'll tell you right now we are going through our third world phase. America is back to being a 19th century power, 19th century nation in which you have this a family at the top that is not quite what an American system would normally be expected to have. So where are we going with Trump right now? So Trump, as I've said, is very clear. He's a mercantilist. He has basically a very broad, pre-Adam Smith view of the world. Which is trade deficits and surpluses matter. They are essentially an indication that somehow capital and specie is flowing out of my country. He doesn't really get services and technology. He's only really focused on goods. If I can't feel it, if I can't touch it, it's not really genuine, economically important. But he's very clear that I want to rework the international system. As one of his aides who came here in February and to Delhi told me, he says, look, there's going to be a lot of chaos because the president gets it. He has to break up the international system. He may not fully understand what he's going to replace it with, but that's going to be the heart of what we're doing right now, that the Washington establishment has to be disrupted. After that, we'll see what happens over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So Trump has come in and his view is that my key is to the only way. Now, if you look at somebody like, let's say, Vance, he'll say that, no, America has to get back into manufacturing. We have to do it by becoming more competitive, by education, by infrastructure, things like that. Trump is very clear that's too much difficulty, too much trouble. Let's just do tariffs. He likes tariffs. It's a simple solution in his view. So let's use tariffs to force countries to buy products, to invest in America, to buy bonds, to support the dollar, and to stop importing, have Americans stop importing things. And with any luck, at the end of it, all Americans will build it themselves. So he's been using that, as you know, he had Liberation Day. He got a bit shocked when the Japanese and the Chinese dumped $1 trillion worth of bonds in response and shook the market and forced him to back down. But he's now continued slowly on that policy. And you can see that in the trade negotiations in various countries, he's basically said, you want me to lower the tariffs, then you have to invest in my country. So Japan, Taiwan, Korea have committed, even Saudi Arabia have committed anywhere between $400 to $1 trillion in investments. He's even claimed that the nature of the investment will be decided by him. Which led to jokes that we'll have more Trump towers in America than anybody knows what to do with. And then, of course, he's tried to stop products from coming into America, which he thinks the American system can produce. In the Indian case, We originally had a three-stage negotiation strategy, which both the American side had agreed to, in which we were supposed to have two stages of tariffs, including an early harvest that would have been done in August. And then the digital technology part would have been done after the Quad Summit that is broadly still expected in November. Um, Trump, however, suddenly decided he wanted to telescope all of that to get it all done in August. That it began the first, I think, the problems that we began to face. Then we had Operation Sindoor and Trump's declaration that he had brought about a ceasefire, and brings in another issue that he has as a person, which is he's desperate to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Which he believes that Obama, not incorrectly, got for nothing. Therefore, he should also get one. So he happily declares that I've stopped wars in Rwanda and Congo, Israel and Iran, India and Pakistan, and he keeps looking for wars to stop. The latest one, obviously, he's still working on is Russia, Ukraine, um, in this hope that he somehow gets a Nobel Peace Prize. Country again that's played this well is Pakistan, which has endorsed him. The only two countries have endorsed him for the Nobel Peace Prize, which is actually decided by Norway and has nothing to do with any other country in the world. But Trump likes that. So Sindhu came in and it triggered what I would say the beginning of friction between him and Modi. Because as you know, Modi has taken it very poorly. This claim that he did the ceasefire, that his intervention, in which the Indian side believes Trump was played by Pakistan. And since that conversation in this April, when Modi gave him a lecture about actually what happened in Sindhu, he and Trump have not communicated once with each other. They've not had a conversation. And in the past 3 weeks, what I've heard is that Trump has tried to reach out to Modi, and Modi's refused to take his calls. So there's very clearly a personal edge now coming in to the negotiations. The last round of negotiations, India had thought it had a deal, though lots of other countries have the same issue, which is that the trade negotiators on the American side say, okay, we're settled, then hand it over to the president, who says, no, let's start. I want these bits changed, keeps going back. Right now, the core negotiating problems are soya, automobiles, and so-called national discrimination between foreign investors, companies that invest in services and finance, i.e. that the treatment for both foreign and Indian companies American companies, Indian companies must be the same. The hard nugget, though, is soya, because Trump has a problem here domestically. His biggest importers of soya in the world are China. They've stopped buying soya as part of their negotiating strategy, has switched to Brazil. But his farmers will harvest soya, I think, in September. These are the MAGA farmers. MAGA farmers do wheat, corn, soya, dairy. They do not do almonds, apples, and berries, which is what we have conceded. Those are grown in democratic states. So he doesn't care about that. So he wants a win on the soya. He's tariffed the Brazilians 50%, basically for taking away his market on soya in China. And now he's insisting that India make a concession on soya. In my view, that's the heart of the problem right now. Automobiles is also there. We've conceded 10% tariff as we did to Britain, but that's only for high-end cars. But America doesn't really make high-end cars anymore. But the real heart of this is now soya. So he's brought in Russian oil, BRICS membership, and so on. And there's a bit of an issue, but I don't think that's a big core of it. Or put it this way, if we conceded and we stopped buying Russian oil, which I don't think is a big deal for us, economically at least, it wouldn't make any difference as far as the tariff is concerned. So I'm expecting more tariffs to come in, because what we're now doing is we're heading for a round of negotiations August 25th. So Trump, very Trump-like, if you look at his strategy, if you read his book, Art of the Deal, he makes this very clear. Your game is first get leverage on the other people you're negotiating, keep pushing hard. Then when you've got him, get him to make a deal with you, then you act very nice and shake his hand and be very agreeable. So I will expect pressure to increase dramatically between now and the 25th, including him being more and more abusive, ratcheting up the tariffs. I would expect more tariffs to come in, potentially all the way up to the Brazilian 50% level. Then the negotiations begin on the 25th, probably continue for 2 or 3 weeks, and then we hope we'll get a deal at that point. at which point we'll start to see the pressure disappear, and then we head into the summit in November. So that's basically where we are right now. One of the things India will also have to decide, which other countries will decide, is do you actually negotiate in good faith? Trump does not have trade promotion authority. In America, a trade treaty has to be passed by the US Senate by a 2/3 majority. He cannot get 2/3 majority because the Democrats control roughly 45, 50% of the seats in the Senate. So in effect, he's just issuing these executive orders. These are not legally binding on any future US president. They're not even binding on the US Congress. They're just administrative agreements, if you wish. So a lot of governments are assuming that the agreement we make with Trump doesn't really matter because in a couple of years he's gone or he's politically useless, at which point we can just throw away the agreement. So the Japanese have committed $600 billion in FDI. I asked the Japanese team recently of senior bureaucrats, I said, how are you going to do that? They said, oh, well, the $600 billion we see. It's a aspirational goal. But their view is basically it's not going to happen. They said it'll be up to the companies to decide. It is not the government of Japan's decision as to whether investment happens. The Europeans have actually all publicly said we're not going to do our investments. It's simply not going to happen. So a lot of these deals are a bit up in the air. So the game is, do you concede now and then assume you can break it later? But curiously, the Indian team is trying to negotiate a deal which they believe will act as a blueprint for future American relations. And that's one of the reasons we're still holding to this rather than conceding things that we feel that we can give away a year or two later. Why don't I end there and go on for questions?
Thanks, Pramit. That was very comprehensive. So let's start with essentially, the topic, which is essentially new economic nationalism and the fallout from what's happening right now. Do you think that we would change as a nation in terms of consumption? Can we do without the energy, US energy, the US defense, and the tech imports? I know that, for example, our AI industries are completely dominant on, completely dependent on NVIDIA chips and other such very high-tech requirements. So do you think we can still be aloof from US imports?
Well, imports is a difficult word. I'd say, let's put it this way, can we live without an economic relationship with America? And the answer is no. We are a capital scarce economy. We shouldn't be carried away with the fact we're still a lower middle income nation. We import huge amounts of capital. The largest source of that capital is the United States, both in FDI, FII, even remittances, and now even trade, because America now, we actually do more trade with America than we do with China. America is by far our largest partner, and there is no other single country that comes close. In fact, nowhere even remotely close to this. And on top of that, the key drivers of our economy, particularly services, which is, because while Trump goes on about our $40 billion goods surplus with him, he more or less ignores the fact that the real core of our economic relationship is the $64 billion surplus we have in services, ex-service exports. And he's quite blasé about that. He doesn't seem to care. As I said, for him, economic seems to be about tangibles more than anything else. So that's one element of that. Second, we have to keep in mind that a lot of the countries, defense, we don't actually buy very much from the United States. We buy, none of our weapons platforms are American, military transport and a few other areas. Besides what we build on ourselves, by ourselves, our two primary defense partners are France and Israel and Russia. But Russia is a declining member of our part of our portfolio because its technology is falling further and further behind. And it is now becoming wholly dependent on China for components. And one of the reasons we cannot buy a lot of the new generation Russian equipment is it has Chinese parts, including semi-chips, because they have no other source for chips. But keep in mind, countries like Israel, to some degree France, definitely other countries that we deal with, Japan, now Taiwan, for example, which is over 200 Taiwanese companies have come to India in just the past 10 years. They make it very clear we're here because Washington tells us to come to India. So the Apple investments by companies like Apple, Samsung, Google Pixel are all partly driven by our relationship with the United States. So I think we've got a long way to go before we become self-reliant in almost anything. Energy remains a terrible story for India. Our dependence, we're now importing even coal. We used to be independent on coal, but we now import huge amounts of coal. We import 80% of our oil, 80% of our natural gas, and our growth in energy consumption is skyrocketing. We simply can't get solar panels, which is solar energy, one of our big stories. We still import, if I'm correct, 40% of the panels. And at the heart of that is our dependence on China for solar wafers. When we've tried to become independent, China has blocked capital goods in, say, manufacturing. And China is now doing the same thing in electronics because they do not want us to become independent in that area. So no, I don't think we can be independent of almost many, and I don't think that's a surprise. That's part of what we are right now in our present stage of development.
So I also wanted to ask you a little bit about what's happening with Russia and the bonhomie that Putin and Trump had earlier. Why is it dissipated? And of course, its impact on India because he's been harping on India buying oil from Russia, and we know that that's just a sliver of what is really being bought by other countries. And in leading to that point itself, and the question around the apart from Russia is the Ashley Dennis's article on the foreign affairs on India. Why should India be aligned? Should be a multi-aligned country and not be more aligned towards the US, and that will probably help us to really leapfrog all these issues that we are having.
Yeah. So on the Russia relationship, our strategy with Russia is pretty clear. In fact, Dr. Jaishankar, when he was the foreign secretary, briefed editors of the major newspapers, including myself, on this. And we asked him, does Russia make sense? Its GDP is now 1/3 of India's. It's very clearly a declining power. The last Goldman Sachs report said it's heading to Nigerian levels of GDP by 2035. And he said, look, the point is that for us, it's straightforward. In the Indo-Pacific, we may be having an alliance or coalition of governments against China. But if you look at Pakistan and China as being our primary rivals, on the Eurasian landmass, the countries that come after that are Russia, Central Asia, Afghanistan, Iran. What we cannot afford is to have those countries form an alliance within China and Pakistan against India. If you just look at a map, that's just how it should be. None of these countries have a problem with India. These are totally non-hostile to India. So there is absolutely no reason, if these countries have a problem with the West, that India should follow the West on that path. It makes no sense for us. Russia is important because it's maybe he called it a managed decline, because it's increasingly hard to find things to do with Russia. But Russia stays neutral when we and China fight. Iran stays neutral when India and Pakistan fight. Why? Because they don't have a problem with us, but they do expect us to do some things with them. And in Russia's case, you have to treat them with respect and you have to give them some money. They're basically a bunch of gangsters who rule the country, so they want money. A couple of $1 billion a year and they're happy, which is peanuts to buy a P5 nation to get on your side. And that's what we do. So we used to buy weapons, but the weapons problem is that the quality is basically deteriorating, so falling behind. So now we're moving to buying energy. But keep in mind, the energy, we've made it publicly clear repeatedly. We buy Russian oil because it is cheaper, not because it's better or anything else. In fact, it's worse than Saudi crude in terms of its refining. It's very difficult to refine. We save about $1 billion a year, $1 billion a month by buying Russian crude. That's not that big a deal. I mean, we have $700 billion in foreign exchange reserves today, so we can easily absorb that. Saudi Arabia, we never bought Russian crude till 2022. We can easily switch back to Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Nigeria, our traditional sources. But we try to maintain that. But I don't think in this case Trump cares about whether we buy Russian oil. As I said, he's concerned about soya. In the negotiations with America, they don't raise Russian oil as an issue. That is just a pressure tactic. Or to put it another way, if tomorrow we stopped buying Russian oil, would Trump remove the tariff? No, because that's irrelevant to him. That's just a pressure tactic. The same way he complains about BRICS membership. That's a joke. Saudi Arabia is now a BRICS member. UAE is a BRICS member. He doesn't himself know who is on the BRICS. He famously asked some journalist from Spain, asked him about the BRICS. He said, is Spain a member of the BRICS? He thought the S was Spain. So he's very vague about it. He'll find an excuse to hit the tariff. For him, it's about the negotiations process that begins on August 25th. So I don't think that's an issue. Ashley, good friend of mine, Ashley's argument has been consistent for a long time. America, you should get closer to America. And that made some sense in the previous presidencies. In the case of Trump, it makes no sense whatsoever because he does not care if you are an ally. He has treated whether you're an ally, an adversary, neutral, it's irrelevant to him because he doesn't believe in alliances. So the countries he's hit Canada, he's hit Canada. I mean, there's any country in the world that could not be closer to the United States is Canada. And the Canadians are in shock. They cannot believe that the United States, that'd be like Bhutan declaring war on India or something. We'd be in India, what happened just now? It's the only country in the world, incidentally, we are treaty obligated to defend. It's the only country the Indian military it has a treaty of defense with. Canada, he's gone after countries in Europe, which are the Denmark, which is the closest in many ways to the United States. He's gone after Japan. So he doesn't care. So Ashley's argument makes no sense, especially with this administration. And in future administrations, some element of that isolationism or the sense that America's alliances no longer make sense will be a constant theme in America. The partnerships that we're going to develop with America or America may develop in the future but it'll still not be a treaty alliance. It will never be an American commitment to defend that country in the way that America has before, which is fine for a country like India because we don't want to be treaty committed to be fighting for another country, and we do not expect anybody else to fight for us.
Open to questions over here.
Thanks, Pramit. Always good to hear you speak. What underlies, I think, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, our attitude towards the US relationship will be, let's do something with Trump, try to establish something for the long term, but let his tenure pass. Yeah. But what underlies a lot of that relationship is what our long-term strategy with China is going to be. Equally with the US. And I find that the government of India finds it difficult to articulate what its actual policy with China is. Post-Galwan, it was very there was a great deal of animosity. Visas became a problem. But over the last couple of months, Jaishankar has gone there. Visas have eased up. We have this issue in terms of capital goods and equipment going back and forth and movement of people from China, which we will call back. Would the Indian government articulate a policy in China? Because I think economically it's totally up there. We don't know what the government really wants and what the government's policies are going to be, and we do change our policies quite often. Do you?
No, so with China, yes. I'd argue we actually have a lot of policies. We don't go public with them. When I was on the NSAB, I was part of 2 China task forces, both for Manmohan Singh and for Prime Minister Modi, but both of them were classified. And I'm sure there are many other similar reports. Those are now outdated. The Indian system tends to be a bit secretive about foreign policy for some. We don't have a national security doctrine. I was part of a committee that wrote 2 of them, and both of them, neither prime minister would release to the public. I remember with Prime Minister Modi, we briefed him, the 20 of us who wrote it, and we recommended that at least a sanitized version be issued to the public. And he just said, I learned a lot. I can't believe the enemies of India would not. We will not be releasing this to the public. So we gave up. But it was even the sanitized 140-page version we produced would not be released. Dovo, we urged him. He says nothing doing. So whatever reason, we have that tradition. It hasn't changed yet. But on China, as we straightforward, I think the view is fundamentally that Chinese concept of statecraft is to never get into a direct conflict with a country. Do not fight. You can, if Sun Tzu, all of the various Chinese strategists always say, defeat your enemy without fighting them. That is the true state mastery of statecraft. All of their heroes, the generals, the statesmen that they applaud in their history, are always the ones who win without fighting. Their view is that the guy who fights is basically taking a gamble because you can never tell what's going to happen on the battlefield. But the Chinese view is simple, don't. And the Chinese strategy right now, at least I would argue the consensus among the Quad governments, is focus on technology. The beating part of American power since World War II has been the almost complete domination of America in the world, almost every cutting technology. China has to therefore just replicate that, and the world will fall to China without China having to fire a shot. So be the leader in AI, in semiconductors, in green hydrogen, in quantum, in all of these, and then you'll by definition be the next United States. So China, therefore, when it comes to India, it looks at it and says, one, not a serious country, it's 1/5, 1/6 our size. They actually say that to Indian diplomats when they meet them, that remember that you are 1/5 our size. They look upon India's democracy as a sign of how chaotic and ridiculous this country is, a sign of weakness. There's a lovely speech made by a Chinese consul general in Calcutta, Mao Wei, back about 20 years ago, where he listed, and it was actually a very funny speech, and I couldn't believe it was actually cleared by the Chinese government, where he listed the 7 reasons India would never blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so the Chinese don't take us that seriously, but we are a nuisance. And so therefore, how do you handle India? So the game is to be perpetually keep India off balance. So they are the ones who have refused since the mid-1980s to come to an agreement on the border. It is not India. It has been China that has deliberately ensured that we come to no agreement. Second, ensure that the economy of India does not go beyond a certain point. They didn't take us too seriously, but now you can see the number of sanctions they impose on us. So when you talk to Apple or Foxconn or even Tata Electronics, they say increasingly the Chinese are moving. Initially, the Chinese said you have to allow Chinese FDI of Chinese electronic firms. And it was India that was making it difficult, saying, no, we got to have it made in India. We have now opened up to that. I know, for example, that there are 14 Chinese companies that Apple has said need to be brought in for them to improve their supply chain capacity in India. Indian government approval, it is a Chinese government that is no longer allowing them to come. We will not allow India to develop an independent supply chain in electronics. They're even, as you know, pulling back Chinese technicians. They're saying Chinese technology, everything. Now, part of that is about ensuring India doesn't do well economically, and I think that's a new element in that policy. That's something we've seen that initially in solar wafers and a few other areas, but it's now spreading across into EVs, into batteries, and so on. There's a separate set of sanctions like permanent magnets, which I think are about the so-called normalization process that you were describing, that when Modi and Xi met in October last year, they said we will go back to where we were pre-2020, Galwan Valley be over. The Chinese conceded the 4 points on the border. They gave them back unilaterally to India that they had taken in Galwan. But they said in return, airplane flights, visas, and eventually military de-escalation must take place. India, to be fair, has been going slow on that. We have no airplane flights even to this day between the two countries, though that's maybe because also our airlines don't have any airplanes. We're still very reluctant to give visas. We've just allowed tourist visas to come through. So China, I think, is a little irritated on that front. And so therefore, I think the permanent magnet ban and a few other things come in. But keep in mind, one of the key, when I've asked some of the EV companies who've gone to China to negotiate, the Chinese are demanding to them, give us books to show, one, give us the blueprints for your EV motors. We want to see your technology. Second, we want to get evidence that you've actually used each magnet in your factory. Why? Because permanent magnets are crucial for drones and missiles. Every single drone we used against Pakistan, every cruise missile we had, unfortunately had a Chinese permanent magnet in it. And the Chinese want to cut that supply off very quickly as possible. So the Chinese have told others governments that we think 30% of the permanent magnets India was buying from us were for their military, not for their EVs, and we're going to cut that off as quickly as possible. One reason we are now wooing the Japanese to come, for heaven's sake, you guys invented the permanent magnet. You are the leading technology makers in this. You've got to teach us. So we have a whole set of different policies, economic sanctions coming in from China. The problem is China's own policy is changing. One, as India becomes a little better than they had expected on the economic front, and second, as their own domestic problems creep in. I was part of a track 2 in April last year, called in by Shamsaram, the Foreign Secretary at IIC here, with a Chinese delegation. And when they said we want to normalize, and I said, why? They said, we don't expect to be friends with you, but we wish to stabilize our southern border because we have domestic problems that require us to stabilize our external front as much as possible. India fundamentally is not a threat to us, so we are prepared to deal with you. So basically, I think it's a temporary truce for the time being.
We have close to 400 members also joined us online. So more than 400 actually. And I'll just summarize 1 or 2 questions from that, and then we'll do more questions here. So one is, what are India's strengths? How do we negotiate for our national interests? What does the US want from us? That and the other story around services. We have a large services surplus. How do we manage all of this?
So, so right now we are definitely in a difficult position because we have an extremely unilateralist U.S. president. The saving grace in his administration is that pretty much everybody else in his administration wants to preserve the bilateral relationship with India. Every delegation that goes there, every ministerial meeting, they often begin by saying, look, our president is difficult, we get that, but we don't want to disrupt this relationship. You are at the core of what we plan to do, America's foreign policy and strategic relations over the next 20 years. So that's one element that's good for us. So we continue to be, I think, very clear in India's mind that ultimately the most obvious economic partner for our future growth has to be the United States. We wouldn't mind Europe or Japan, but they're simply incapable now. Japan is in serious decline. I go there almost every 6 months. My company has 120 Japanese clients, and you can just see the fact that their demography is killing them. They just have no people anymore. And they don't know what to do about it because they're so reluctant to allow migration into their country. It's a crazy way to watch very amazingly brilliant medium-sized Japanese technology firms die simply because the family that owns it dies out and they just shut it down and they lose that technology. Hundreds of them almost every year now are disappearing in Japan. A similar thing is now starting to spread in Korea and Taiwan. And they have no idea what to do about it. So the Europeans are almost not, I mean, they're not as bad because they're institutionalized, but their decline is also quite phenomenal now. I mean, France, the second biggest economy, 70% of GDP is government spending. It's completely unsustainable. Everybody in France knows this. They don't know what to do about it. So you don't have too many options right now. You don't have too many options, both in terms of technology, corporate, and market. We will spread. I think we always should be diversifying, and I'm glad that we are trying to. But it's something new for us in many ways. A lot of markets, whether in Africa, Latin America, almost unknown for most Indian companies. So whenever I now meet corporate in India companies, I say, please go to Guyana. It has more oil. It literally has larger oil reserves in Saudi Arabia. Half its population is Indian. They're desperate to build a relationship with us. This is going to be the boom economy of the third world. So go out there, and everybody's like, Guyana? What? They know it for the cricket, but not much else. So Yeah, I think we can't avoid America, and I still think Trump is a temporary phase. But as I said, some elements of Trumpism will survive. Uh, it would be nice to diversify, but but given the fact that China, in my view, will become increasingly difficult to work with economically with us, we don't have too many options.
Mr. Chaudhuri, before I come to my question, I have a small comment. You called China in the beginning of your address a rising power. I was a little amused. I don't think we can call them a rising power. They are a big power already, isn't it? Economically, scientifically, notwithstanding their internal problems, I think they are a huge power to be reckoned with. Probably America doesn't realize that. We should not make that mistake at all. My question is only one. Trump has a Rambo approach because of his past or whatever it may be. He has alienated Canada, he's alienated European Union, everybody in the world. So he doesn't care about anyone else. What about Vance? What about a few hundred senators and congressmen and women? Have they all also lost their mind? Do they think that they can live in a cuckoo land without the rest of the world and they can remain isolated without importing anything, without, obviously they won't be able to export also anything else that despite all the powers they have on their defense power, awesome, their R&D, their high-tech manufacturing, scientific, everything they have. But do they think this is the day and age that they can be just by themselves insulated?
I don't think so. I think if you read, for example, Vance, when he was campaigning to be the US president as a presidential candidate for the Republican primary, his speeches are very clear. He lays out a very different concept. He still believes America should become much more independent, and America should have less international connections. But the nature of those connections, as I said, has to change. And countries like India make more sense in his view than Europe. So I don't think within his administration there's any doubts about that. And whether it's the Pentagon, in fact, I was asking somebody in Washington, I said, so but the point is that Trump is still popular. I mean, he's still, and the US, there's no argument in America to come to him and say the US economy is tanking because your policies make no sense. The US economy is still doing reasonably well. Probably will start to tank, but most economists I've talked to said not until about the December, November period. Right now, the jobs are still coming in. Inflation is still low because everybody said, oh, you do tariffs, inflation will go up. Not happening. Partly not because of the tariffs, but because energy prices are collapsing across the world. We're now at a planet of 3.5 million barrels of oil a day surplus above consumption. So that's going to be continue to be an issue. But I think by the end, my suspicion is by the beginning, first quarter of next year, we'll start to see the bad effects of Trump's economics start to hit him, which is when the Republican revolt against him will start to pick up because the midterm elections are coming in November. His biggest fear is the House, the lower house, falling to the Democrats, because after that, they will launch so many criminal investigations against him and his family. The last 2 years of administration will be them talking to their lawyers and speaking before inquiry committees and trying to stay out of jail. And that's his biggest fear right now.
Yes,
Thanks, Pramit. Thank you for your insights. My question is on Pakistan. What have they done tangibly to get Trump's attention? Or is Trump just using them to forecast?
Oh, I don't think Trump actually, from what I understand, his officials actually thought they were doing India a favor by intervening. So they actually bought the argument from Pakistan that the conflict had gone nuclear, and therefore they had to intervene. And in fact, they got into a fight with the MEA officials later on, who said, "We did you a favor. Let's sit down, let's sit down and give you a long lecture about India, Pakistan." One of the problems the Trump administration has, it has no muscle memory of the Indo-Pakistan relationship. There's literally nobody in there. The State Department is empty. The White House has no people. He's virtually abolished his National Security Council. It used to have 300 staff members. It's down to 25. So there is no Deputy Assistant Secretary for South Asia. The guy who's coming in, Paul Kapoor, is excellent. He knows Pakistan very well. But when I met him in Washington, he says, "Oh, I'm still waiting for Senate confirmation. I'm not allowed to. I can't do anything because officially I'm not there." So you literally have a government that is empty of almost any of its experts. So that's one problem that they have. But yes, Trump is highly personalized, and he's very happy at the Nobel Peace Prize endorsement. He actually takes nuclear war seriously. There's an excellent interview of Fiona Hill, a National Security Council person, nuclear expert in America, who worked with Trump in his first administration. She said he's obsessed. He's with nuclear war. He's watched every single post-nuclear apocalyptic movie and goes crazy about all of them. Tell her, like, in a nuclear radiation can melt granite. Man, I build buildings of granite. The idea that that's going to melt, he gets really excited about this. But nuclear wars, she said it's a Cuban Missile Crisis generation. It's not a surprise. All of that generation in America are obsessed with nuclear weapons. So he takes that seriously. Pakistan has dumped a huge amount of money in crypto into the crypto scheme. So the World Liberty Fund alone, I think they put in at least $20 million. Some of the intelligence estimates I've had have seen 50 million plus have been given into the family. That gives him access. The problem he faces is that Pakistan faces. He also has this weird obsession with mineral rights. So everywhere he goes, give me mineral rights. So he said, I'll get oil from Pakistan. I've asked Pakistani economists, people have been looking for oil in Pakistan since 1915, and we haven't found any yet. So we don't know what the hell he's talking about. Even the one single gas field, which we found in 1952, the Swee gas field, still living off of that. The other parts of the gas is probably deep in Western Balochistan, where everybody's terrified to go, including the Chinese, including the Saudi Arabians. Nobody has dared to go there to explore because the Baloch capture the engineers and hold them ransom. And as one Chinese official told me, he says, yes, and the Baloch, they have this habit, they take you ransom, they send the ransom note and they say, give the money, and if you don't, they chop off the nose of the executive and send them off. Then they chop off the ears and then they take off other parts of the body, after which nobody wants that engineer anymore. He's useless. So everyone's terrified to go into Western Balochistan, right? But they sold it to Trump, but the rest of the administration refuses to work with Pakistan. The Pentagon says, we can't work with these guys. 87% of their arsenal is Chinese. The intelligence agency won't work with them. State Department says, what are we going to work with? And he said, I'm looking for an oil company to invest in Pakistan. And I know several of the big American oil companies are my clients, and they said, no chance are we going into Pakistan. This is just crazy. It is a security nightmare on a scale beyond anything. So in my view, the Trump thing in Pakistan will not last because there is no basis, no foundation for them to push the relationship. Pakistan is bankrupt. And if you look at their last budget, they had to slash welfare spending, education spending, water management, health spending by 50%. Why? Because the military said we need 20% increase in defense budget. And the AIMA said you have to increase your primary budget surplus by 0.6% of GDP. In other words, you have to squeeze an extra entire 1% out of GDP out of a country that has no money. So they're now broke. They have literally no capacity. I asked somebody, American defense company, are you going to sell anything to Pakistan? He said, where's their money? They can't afford to buy a tank. They have no money at all. It's just impossible. And once the Indus Water Treaty starts to really kick in, the 4 dams have now been operationalized, 3 are being built. We had a meeting with Dr. Jaishankar just soon after. And he says, we asked him, can you stop the Indus waters? He said, nobody can stop Indus water. It's ridiculous. We flood our own country if we try that. We will ensure that when Pakistan wants the water, it will not be available. And when they don't want the water, it will suddenly be available. And that's where the power of the Indus comes into play. And their winter crop, the Rabi crop, this year will be the first test of India using these dams, this water, weaponizing water, to damage effectively 30% of their agricultural crop. And the game is simple. Next time we will inflict this pain every time you give us a problem. I said, is there what will require them to give us back the Indus Water Treaty? He says, we've made it clear, we're twinning this with terrorism. You stop terrorism, you get the water. If Lashkar or Jaish continue to function, no water. Well, the water will come in strange and bizarre manner which your farmers will go nuts about, because farmers very dependent on water flow. 80% of their water flow, river water flow, comes from India. I asked them, I said, what was strange about the treaty? He said, I'm surprised we never used this before. He told me.
On a somber note, before we end, I'd like to ask you the final question, which is, what is the worst case scenario for India? What if these talks fail?
Okay,
what will happen?
So let's assume we get hit by a 25 to 30% tariff. Now, at present, Trump has actually not imposed tariffs on pharmaceuticals, electronics, and energy, three of which represent 50% of our goods exports to America. So actually, the 25% tariff only hits 50%. We assume he's going to hit pharmaceuticals globally, not just us. Though when I've asked the American system, they said, well, we don't know because you provide generic medicines, you go to the poorest people in America, the Medicare, Medicaid recipients. So if prices of those start to rise 25%, or supply disruptions happen and we start to have shortages of these things, that's going to be politically insane in the United States. They'll immediately be pushed back. So I have my doubts how far he can go on the pharmaceuticals. And he himself has said, we will phase it in over time. So I have a suspicion that we need not worry too much about pharmaceuticals, because the phase in of a president who only has, in my view, about 2 years of effective rule probably won't affect us too much. Energy, yes, petroleum products could be theoretically affected, but petroleum products are highly fungible. It's very easy to sell them in other parts of the planet. It doesn't really matter. If you can't sell it in America, you sell it to some other country, and the Americans will end up buying it from some third country, and it just goes into a little circle. And electronics is going to be interesting because the single largest export is Apple iPhones. So in effect, he's going to have to hurt American consumers. And the one man who's really stood up to him is Tim Cook, who has just said, I'm not going to change. I know he's told him, Trump, I'm not changing my India strategy at all. One, because Apple is so phenomenally wealthy, they can just ride out a Trump presidency. They can subsidize the phone. But they made it clear, the price of an Apple iPhone will go up to $3,000 in the United States if you build it in America. There's no way you can do that. So my sense is that electronics, you're going to also see very minimal impact. So you're only looking at textiles, textiles, jewelry, and a few other sectors. Some of that can be transferred to other countries, but the calculation, I think you've all seen them in the papers, most countries, and we're looking at about a 0.5% of GDP loss in our growth if the tariffs were to stay. We can afford that. And I have a suspicion a lot of that will be mitigated by the simple fact that moving to other countries. Keep in mind the rupee would also soften as a consequence, but the good thing about rupee devaluation is it immediately offsets your tariff. So my sense is, as normally happens in tariff wars, the actual impact is normally a fraction of what the original plan was. Service exports is the real danger point, but so far there is no real pushback on that.
I have one very basic question. They are increasing the tariff on the goods they are importing in the US.
Yes.
In that way, the people of US will have to pay more.
Correct. Well, what's happening?
And that money will go in the pocket of the government of the US.
The tariff.
Tariff.
Yeah.
It means, what is the situation of inflation in US?
It's the connection between tariff and inflation is not that direct as the textbooks would like to say, because a couple of things happen. As I mentioned, you can have currency devaluation as a consequence, in which case the tariff gets absorbed through that. Second, companies will absorb some of the tariff themselves. So Walmart and other companies like that are, when they're importing, let's say, bananas, facing a tariff wall in America. There was a live session in Congress where somebody complained to Howard Lutnick. He said, there is no way America can build a banana. Why are we wasting our time tariffing this? But Walmart faces a 20% tariff. They basically absorbed half that cost themselves as a company, but passed on 10% to the consumer. So yes, you're starting to see in the inflation numbers sudden bursts in inflation, certain food items which have to be imported, avocados and stuff, and clothing. We're starting to see a surge in clothing, but that's being offset by a drop in energy prices. So a lot of manufactured goods are actually falling right now. So the overall inflation rate in America is actually remains quite stable. Well, that's why most economists say we're really going to see the hit probably in November, December, when a lot of companies will start to allow the full flow of the tariff prices to hit the consumer. Because what they will do is they will gradually increase the price as it starts. And already FMCG companies are already saying this is hitting our bottom line because they're the ones affected very quickly. We will begin to slowly increase the price of our products bit by bit all the way to December. Which is why I'm expecting the political hit to come in the first or second half of first half of next year. But that's what I would expect on the basis of what we're seeing right now.
Thank you. Thank you, Pramit. You want to do quick? Thank you so much for joining us today this afternoon. It's been a very, I would say, entertaining session and, of course, informative as well. We are, of course, very curious to what's going to happen in the next few months. And a lot of people, in fact, when I go to the ground and talk to people, they're very, very, the economy in some ways is sort of stagnant in many, many types of industries where they're just waiting to see what is going to happen. But thank you for your insights and always a pleasure to have you. We have a small memento.